turn to make myself a host. There we go. All right. All right. Let's get rolling. Morning, everybody. Thank you, especially on late notice. Thank you for coming. This presentation, as you received an email hopefully yesterday, first part is an overview of language technology. The goal is not to teach you to use some specific tool, some specific software. This audience is too varied. You don't even use the same tools. To let you know that there is something out there. How if it would be useful, or if you have a task that you want to complete, maybe there is a tool out there that will help you to complete that task. Yeah. So, there are 3 in this subsection of the technology department. Kevin Bradford, he is working on resource into Bureau de Traducteur, which is a translator's workplace for French speakers. He is leading, trying to say, what resources create and what can we get in there? Because at the moment, Bureau de Traducteur is incomplete. There's just a lot of things that were even in Pupitre that we don't yet have in BDT. Lou Pascal, I'm hoping that maybe within the technology consultant, I am language technology consultant. All right, and actually, all right. So, you know me. I think all of you know me, and you've known me for quite a while. But even though I work in language technology, my bachelor's was in integrated science and technology. I do have a master's in linguistics. I've been studying through Dallas, and I have taught one course already through Dallas, language documentation. Or sorry, sort of an accident that I ended up. And right now, I am adjunct faculty at Dallas International, taking over the language documentation course for Dallas for this summer, years after that, of course, the odd years. And I've done a course at, I'm actually going to be teaching another course, my 4th or 5th course at University of Chong very soon. So, all right, back to the other presentation. Okay, so Shift F5. All right, so I want to talk about expectations a little bit. Traditional language technology. So, computers. Who knows who Frank Herbert is? Science fiction author. What do such machines really do? In this case, they're actually talking about thinking machines. They increase the number of things that we can do without thinking. There's the real danger. The things we do without thinking. So, things that people do really well. And there are things that we can do really well with computers. So, computers are really good at filtering, sorting, retrieval, storage, statistics, repetition, calculations, and searching. A computer can do the same thing thousands of times and not complain about it. But humans are really good at adaptation, recognize transfer of learning. You can learn to do something over here and apply that over here. Categorization. Oh, things go together, these things do not. Together, you can do research, analysis, quality communication. Computers can help you communicate far away. You get deeper. You teach it to do something, it does that thing again. And again and again. All right. So, program that I've developed for language technology. When some machine translation in my language, well, but it takes a little bit before you can get to that. It takes a lot of work and a lot of resources before you can get to that point. Start out with foundational technology. Type, or can the letters of your alphabet? That's a big deal. And for Cameroon, that was only solved in 2007. Can you type in the language? Do you have all the characters you need? I don't know. We'll find out. Yesterday about diacritics. Okay, maybe we do need to add another diacritic or two so that you have some options to choose from, but there are very careful choices as to what you choose and what you don't. Or at least you can use IPA. Then you can move into the linguistic tools. So you can start recording, you can do transcription, you can do analysis, you can work on dictionary. Do a lot of things once you have a process to be able to handle. Yes, technically some of the linguistic tools require audio, so you don't necessarily need font. If you're going to be working with it, most of the time in linguistics you have a written copy available to work with. Once you get that done, close to at least you're getting close to an orthography. That works for the people, at least to test orthography. It's at that point that people can start creating. They can write books, they can write papers, they can do their alphabet charts, they can make apps. And this is when it sort of gets beyond us. In this room, Godfrey made Joseph are not the ones that are going. Are not the ones that are going to be writing the books. We will be encouraging the people that are writing the books, but the content in general is not up to SIL staff. And then you get up to another level. So, are we going? Is it appropriate to training manual for? He says yes. Are you sure?
Is it impossible?
Yeah. Okay. Is it priority? Let's go with that question. Is it a priority? No. Okay. So most of the time, training materials end up, or for tools, end up being in. That can be sufficient. Most people, everyone that is using a computer in Cameroon is using it in French, English, or German. It's not this word in my language. I don't know that there are for full day translations. There might be for Linux. I don't know, actually. That's interesting, yeah. But most of the time, if you're using your smartphone, you're using your computer, you have to use a little bit of English or French to get to the content. And that's just the situation we're in. But once you have a lot of content, then you get to the really interesting things up here. The reason that, well, can translate between English and French. Millions of documents, or aligned documents in French and English that it can look at and work with and try and do a translation. Massive amounts of data, because it used to be tools like that. Even the tool, the language, and then it spits something back out. That's not how AI works. The language, and it tries to adjust and say, oh, well, if it's this and this, then it might be this. It's all statistics, but it doesn't. I hope that you've heard of languagecameroon.info. That is the language off of the website is a little more static. But this is the home of the Cameroon keyboard. I have posted some articles on the general alphabet, fonts and keyboards, and you can get a lot of things here. All right. Going up that pyramid. When we talk about the foundational technologies, we need font encoding support. So, to appear on the screen. But sometimes, when you choose a font that doesn't include your character, this slide has a timer on it. You get a square. Microsoft just changed something and even this anymore. What it does now is it tries. It's legible, but it's correct. But it's better than it was because you can read it or whatever, and it just looks really odd. Right now, if you look at several of the languages that are on Bible.is, Faith by Faith comes by here, this because they chose a really cute. Have most of the world's language or world's characters on it, and so it doesn't display. It doesn't display properly. Less of a problem now. Fonts, most of the Mac fonts can't include Cameroon characters since 2008. But you still are sometimes going to choose, oh, I like this little handwriting font. You choose that, and you end up with a bold schwa right in the middle of it. And sometimes hard I and the open O, but the diacritics don't stick, especially in italic. Italic is not your problem. So we do have some core SIL fonts that are practical where you need them. And Keras SIL was created for laser printers. It was created after dot matrix so that we could have the clearest text on the screen that we could. We also have Keras SIL literacy. And all of our, except Andika, which already isn't a literacy font, have a literacy version. The literacy version is G, and this A, and the hook G, rather than having the circles and the double story A here. So we have literacy fonts. We also have compact fonts. For those of you that are writing an article, if you put a word in Keras in the middle of a document, vertical spacing, or Keras Literacy Compact, then you can use that in the middle of text, and it won't throw off your vertical spacing with the line. The reason that Keras has such extra, they have allowed 3 diacritics on top and 2 on bottom. They didn't know what languages this is going to be used for, so they gave exceptions to be able to work with it. But the Keras, the compact fonts allow you 2 diacritics on top and 1 on bottom before things start to flip. We also have doulos. Most doulos looks a lot like Times New Roman. It does a lot of the same things as Times New Roman. It has a little bit bolder diacritics, so a lot of times people will use doulos for their IPA, and they'll use Keras for other things in the language, just if you need a little bit of contrast. We also have a literacy and a Indica. We have Indica is the full font that has as possible, that are all the characters that have been added to it. Indica New Basic is a smaller set of that font, but Indica. So if you metallic, you want to grab Indica New Basic, and it supports all of Cameroon's characters. Yeah, thank you. Okay. Yeah. Yeah, there you go. Cool. So a while back, I was asked to create, if we could have a font with the lines on it. That became primary in Word, in Office, and even in apps. It doesn't work in PowerPoint for some reason. PowerPoint does spacing weird. I don't know why. It replaces the space with something that's not really a space. But this font includes. We could do it with gray lines, visible. Apparently, the world has not yet decided on what technology they're going to use for multicolored fonts. There are about 5 different of them I can do with free software. At this point, I'm not going to be creating one with the gray lines. I would love to, but the folks that make these fonts have a plan for Keras, doulos, fonts that have these lines, fonts that are. They are working on that. They are hoping to have that within the next few years for all of the fonts. So this actually will end up being unneeded, and I'm okay with that. So keyboards. Right now, we have a really good solution for. We have good solutions for IPA and So right for this is for Cameroon keyboard. We have the Azerty and the QWERTY. The Azerty, the French version, the QWERTY, the Anglophone, the version for computers from the US. I do not use it, but there are multiple QWERTZs out there. If that's something that's necessary or that's something people are interested, we can see about that. I'm still suggesting people use the Microsoft version. It's just a little more setup. It requires downloading about 60 megabytes, installing it, updating it from time to time. These are sort of set it and forget it. If you put the Microsoft version, it works everywhere, and you move on. But because Keyman now supports Android, Linux, Mac, I do keep those keyboards up to date, so anyone off of Windows use the Cameroon keyboard. Okay. So for QWERTY or Azerty. When I started, so it was really hard to jam everything in there. The QWERTY had a lot of free space, but reorganized this keyboard in 20 from about 10 different languages, and we said, okay, here's the Schwab. This one was a bit haphazard. That many people were using was a little bit more organized, but now they are. And since January of 2018, I believe, have this available, the Cameroon keyboard available on Android. So if you're installing it on Android, you can go to the Play Store and just search for Clavier Cameroon look for that icon, download it, install it, and use it. If you're on an iPhone, you have to install Keyman first, and then after you install it, choose the Cameroon keyboard you want. I can't develop for a Mac or for iPhone because I don't own a Mac, and they don't allow you to do that, and it's also really expensive and hard to get in there. So we have those fonts that cover all our characters, even to Roman, Calibri, whatever. They have all the characters we need. So thankfully, here in Cameroon, because the alphabet that they chose is Latin Roman script, and on the shoulders of those that have gone before, and all of our characters already work. All right. One thing that is a problem is very often a computer that has been rearranged into an AZERTY. I call that a faux AZERTY. And a faux AZERTY does not have the greater than less than key. You cannot use the IPA keyboard without the greater than less than key. Work on an IPA keyboard for AZERTY, let me know. We need to find some other characters that can be used instead of greater than less than so that it works on a faux AZERTY. Yeah.
Is super cool down one?
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Yeah. I'm going to be sharing out the links to all these presentations, so yeah. So right now, in pretty much all applications, you can use it in Facebook and WhatsApp and Telegram, and you can use it on your computer in Word, Publisher, LibreOffice, whatever you're trying to work with. You now have a solution for typing on everything but probably BlackBerry. Who does that anymore? So, yeah. So then you get into, okay, so also encoding. I'm going to go a little faster through this. With encoding, if you have a document that is in the old non-Unicode pre-2008 encoding, set it up on your machine so you can do the conversion, or I can just do a one-off conversion. If we need to move away from those old fonts and move into the new fonts, and this is the tool we use. The Cameroon converter has existed for a very long time. It's a very and painless transfer to move things to Unicode. Except for in Publisher, it's a lot of clicking OK. But it's possible. Okay, it's possible. We'll go with that. So once you have those technologies, those basic technologies, then you can move into linguistic tools. You all have heard of Flex. Most of you used it. Once you take things out of Flex, you can put them in Webinary, and you can make that available. These blue icons here are the languages of Cameroon, or the areas representing the languages of Cameroon that have webinaries. So many of you have already put those on the web, and that is exciting. We have transcription tools. Saymore is the big one. That's what I'm specifically interested in. This will take an audio recording, break it into chunks, and allow you to do either a written transcription or what we call an oral annotation. Talk about that in the next presentation. There are survey tools out there. Some of them are old, but they still work to allow you to do the collection of a comparative word list. And then once you're done with WordServe, you can pull that into COG, computational linguists, and it does a lot of things automatically. It looks up, these charts are all generated automatically based data, and it is really slick. And if you've been working in Saymore, this is my thesis tool that takes all the different layers of Saymore and allows you to play with the original audio, the careful re-speaking, and the translation audio, and it resyncs it back to the video. I'm working on right now making it possible to export this out so you can put that stepped audio in YouTube or something like that. Still working on that. And of course, we have audio tools. The SIL one is Speech Analyzer. It's out there. Prat is out there as well for working. technology assistants. But if you have a Flex or a base, Phonology Assistant is really handy for finding out what is in the language, what combinations are there, what do we have, where do they appear, and in what context. For this certain, it doesn't do tone, so if you're going to be doing tone analysis, you're probably going to end up being in Decoreke, but they're very similar tools. So once you get that linguistic base, which is which is a big deal, then people can start creating in the language. They can do translation. They can work in paratext. They can cross in Bloom. Some of the new things that Bloom can do, one of them is comic books. You can do comic books inside Bloom with the little call-outs. You can do, you can still do audiobooks. If you have video in them for sign language, and you can actually do quizzes now in Bloom. They've added that, and even interactive things. If you can create something on the web, you can put it in Bloom and make it available. So you can also, once you've created whatever content you created, scripture, dictionary, keyboards, you can make an app for it. This works really well. Doesn't like, especially our scripture and dictionary and reading apps, and so they keep blocking them. So it's really hard to get them onto the store, and that's really the only. There are tools out there like Primer Prep. I showed Primer Prep. I believe I showed that in Buddha. This allows you to take a whole bunch of texts in your language, pull them together, and it gives you statistics on word frequency. It allows you to define a teaching order and redefine a teaching order, and it gives you suggested words that work once you've taught 3, 4, 5, 6 letters. And it can be very handy for getting ready to do literacy work. But you need content. You need to have text in the language to be able to use it. And yes, one other thing you out, and you can use it to make an auto-completion dictionary for Keyman. So if you take this list of words, start typing KH, it says, oh, do you mean kalavas or kalas? Now, that's if the only text that you have is the New Testament, you're going to have a hard time talking about getting gas for your car. You're going to have a hard time talking about computers and things like that. So you need texts that cover a wide variety of things to do a little bit of cleanup. I mean, how often are you going to be talking about Nebuchadnezzar in a text message? It needs a little bit of cleanup so that you're not just putting in all the Bible words. We also have a wonderful alpha chart. Thank you, Rick. Thank you now to Brian for up to date. So much easier than trying to do the same work in Publisher. We have Zotero. This is not an SIL tool, but Zotero is the one that was mentioned yesterday. This is a very good citation manager tool. If you are writing a document and you are typing out your references, stop. You should be storing them in a citation management. And then this, I can use this with X-Link paper. Does that need to be in italic? I don't know. Done automatically. All right. And of course, you can still create content in the LibreOffice, Scribus, GIMP, whatever. Because these technologies work in the SIL tools, they also work quite well these days in the standards. So training, there are websites out there to ask questions. So these are the websites, the general websites. If it is a scripture software other than Paratext, you go here. If it is a general technology software, so Keyman or Phonology Assistant, Flex, you go here. This is you can ask questions. You can look to see what the questions are that are asked before. When I have a question, I go here, look to see if it's there, and I will post a request to see, hey, can anybody help me with this? I run into this situation. Each software tool does have its own website, and very often there are training materials available on that site. For example, paratext.org has a lot of video and text training materials to learn how to use it. We also have the language wikis that the folks that do language technology update. So we have some Flex resources. We have resources on many of these tools here that go above and beyond what the resources are that are on the website. Once you move through all of that, and people have created a lot of documents, you can get into really interesting stuff. So you can create spell checking tools for LibreOffice. We did for a full day 6 years ago, 8 years ago. We created an Arabic and a Roman script for full day spell checking for LibreOffice and Flex because we had. And you can also create those predictive data. At this point, somebody has a bunch of text. We want to try doing a test word list and playing with it in Keyman to get that running. Then you get into the other stuff. I'm going to leave this aside because I have another presentation about AI later. So right now, and this is, the problem is no longer that the technology doesn't. One time that was a problem, that was an excuse. The problems now are personnel, communications, logistics, access, training, funding, and resource development. No big deal, right? So, yeah, those are the problems now. The tools support the language available in the languages to do things. Cultural and language understanding, using technology to do language development. So, all right, so I'm going to stop with that presentation. So hope is to do 45, or that was my hope was to do 45 minutes in there. 45 minutes of the on language documentation, and then any leftover time on talking about AI and machine learning. So, all right. Do I dare open up for questions there? Let's go. Questions, not how do I use it, but about, or just about the general overview. Is there anything new to anyone about that I just glossed over too quickly? Yes.
Alpha chart, I tried to get it installed. It's really dead.
Okay. Alpha chart is a website. You should be using it on the website, and installing it requires knowledge of servers and Linux. Shift. So you should be accessing it from alphachart.silcam.org. You don't have to install it on your machine, and you probably shouldn't install it on your machine. It is a website. You can create an account there for free. You can access the alphabet charts that already exist, and you can also create your others. One thing to note is we have Art of Reading is a series of thousands of images, and you can use Art of Reading images to create your alphabet chart. They're already in, if you get Art of Reading, they're already PNG files, portable network graphics, that can be pulled into this tool. Yes. Oh, sorry. Katerina, and then you had.
I just have a little question. How many entries can you support?
Theoretically, it's unlimited, but if you want to be able to synchronize to their server a lot of content, several gigs of content, then there is a paid plan. If you're just storing the citations, you could probably have everything you're going to use in your academic life. If you're actually storing PDFs and images and documents inside it, you would probably want to pay for or to get their paid service. Yeah.
And just as a follow-up to that, do you know, can you read from other programs such as Citavi? Because we have Citavi.
Zotero, RefWorks, I don't know Citavi, but there are a lot of standard exports. And so and even Mendeley, there are a lot of standard exports, BibTeX and others that you can use to move data between. If you wanted to transition, yes, it should be possible. There might be a little bit of cleanup to do, but yeah, that should work. I worked in RefWorks, and then I moved my RefWorks to Zotero, and I've done some work in Mendeley, and I've been able to move the content to the different tools to use it. And Abby? Yeah. There we go. There you go. So here are the support sites. The scripture one is a little bit more locked down for both to be able to edit, but I believe to see this, SIL does work in some closed context, so we've got a little higher security, fairly low on the general technology one. Yes, Joseph.
That's written in the 80s with
Yeah.
the old characters.
Yeah.
I wonder what can I do to that?
Either we can do it together, or I can train people to do this. Is it yeah, bundle. Right now, there's a push to do some others, and also as we're working on archiving, if we need to do a workshop on the SL converters, let's work that out and get more people to do it. It doesn't usually, for Word, it doesn't usually take long. Publisher, it takes a little bit longer, but we need to do it. At some point, we need to do it, and it's not a hard process. It just takes a little bit of setup on your computer first. Yeah.
The latest government strike.
Yes.
So
manuscript. There are converters that for those older, even older ones than the pre-Unicode, it can be done. We're going to get the text out of it. The formatting is probably not going to come with it. Bold, italic, whatever, that may all get gone, but we should be able to pull the text out. Okay. So, closing that. Okay, so now, all right. Here. So, documentation was adapted from another one, but as staff of SIL, language communities, you know that there are languages that are dying, and you care about that. I love that. So, language documentation. Well, okay. You know that once the children are no longer speaking and using the language, it begins that slide towards disappearing. And so, how do you respond? How do we respond to language death? Do we just let it go? In relation context, we want to meet the people where they're going to be in 20 or 15 or 20 years. We want to do a translation where those people are going to be speaking in the next generation. And that makes sense for our context. But what if that language is going to die in 15 years? Okay, we may not be doing language technology, or we may not be doing, but we could be doing language documentation. We can be working to preserve the culture, language and culture that are all together. And language documentation is that tool. So language documentation was pretty much set, and it was set out in 1998. The activity concerned with collecting, transcribing, translating, commenting on primary data. Now, in 1998, that meant something a little bit different, and even before that. But the goal of language documentation is to provide a comprehensive record of the linguistic practices and a characteristic of a given speech community. Language documentation is not language description. That is, they are two separate tasks that happen usually one after, and then you do the analysis. So language documentation is collecting primary data. You're recording, you're transcribing, you're translating. Who can do it? Anyone, really. Anyone that understands how to use a recorder or to write could be involved in doing language documentation. Usually language documentation is done on site. It is done in the village with as many speakers as possible getting together. And usually language documentation is a short-term project. We're going to work on collecting for this few weeks, and then we're going to do the analysis, then we're going to do the annotation, and we're going to move, and then the project ends. It's like, oh, this is a language where there are 3 speakers left, and at the moment they get along. Let's go do it while they're still talking, and let's collect as much as we can about this language and working with the community. Is focusing on that secondary data. Oh, this is how describing. This is how the language. Oh, it looks like they have 2 different forms of this verb, whatever that is. Usually, this is an academic process, analysis, generalization, very often done by professional linguists, and it could be done on or off site. You can collect the data, and you can do the analysis later in your office or your house. And those are long term. Traditional linguistics, dictionary and interlinearized text, so that you have the resources to do the work you need. That requires extensive training and years of effort, as all of you know. But actually, various projects end up producing the grammar, the dictionary, and the interlinear text. I think we're a lot weaker on those interlinear texts in our context. So the other big deal, and if you were at the archiving workshop, this plugs in, there's not been a practice of archiving recordings. If you were doing your language learning in a village, and you have recorded hours and hours of things, and yeah, you use them to write your paper, or you use them to help yourself learn the language, did you archive? Did you get permission to archive that content? Probably not. And it's a shame. We've collected all this stuff. The only people that can collect that are people that are actually there and involved and know the community. And so we have a lot of content that is just disappearing. So language documentation can be a specialization. And people like Woodbury and Himmelman and others, for them it is. I am not a descriptive linguist, I'm a documentarian. I am going to sit down, I'm going to get all this stuff later, all this stuff together, and then I can pass that on to the community, pass that on to the linguists, and they can do their thing. So it can be you can go out to a village, and it can be a project to go unto itself, and you can get funding for this, to go and do a language documentation project where you collect a whole bunch of data, you do the annotation, and you put that in the archive and make it available. And that could become the foundation of linguistic work, language development, or language revitalization. But again, that's left for the reader to do. The basic tasks of documentation are making archival quality recordings, providing metadata that describes what those are, who spoke, when they did it, what the context was, transcribing the text, translating the text, getting the informed consent, actually that should have been up here, archiving it, and allowing public access as citable. When Himmelman was talking, he talked about these 3 things: compile, comment, archive. That's great. If you are a detached linguist that doesn't really care what the community is going to do with it, you're finished. Okay. Austin added a few extra things. So recording, yes, still there. Transfer to a management thing. So get that, organize it. Say more is the example there. Adding value, that can be annotation, metadata, and then archiving. But what about mobilization? How do you use it? How does the community use it? We'll get into that in a moment here. So I want to promote language documentation. And if you are a linguist or you're working in you're creating primary resources. Even, along the way, you're creating those primary resources. And I hope that, so in the course of your language work, you may collect text, you may compile word lists, collect recordings, and you'll analyze those documents, and then you're going to write your paper and give a presentation on those findings. But while the analytical papers you write may make you rich and famous in the linguistic world, we need to realize that the culturally relevant content you collected along the way may sometimes be more valuable to the community. The content you accidentally created along the way may be more valuable to the people than what you actually write about it in the future. So it can be a cultural archive, a historical record. It can be the building blocks for language revitalization. It can be a standardizing force. Once you have it, or starts to settle down. And it could be a source for more advanced work. Language documentation on a small scale is proper stewardship and in the dry, narrowly selected elicitation of a bunch of verb forms, that still could help to serve future language and cultural development purposes. And so I believe that every language worker could benefit from a minor in language documentation techniques, proper recording, archiving, and making it available for mobilization. So, yep. So virtually every project produces these primary recordings, but virtually no project data is preserved. And that's not okay anymore. The language communities are calling for them, the academics are calling for them. And we should want to comply because language documentation has so many potential benefits. So here's an example. If you pull the data in and you archive some audio data alongside your publication, you've got this option. Inchani exhibits a contrasting and such as in the words ge and ge, or Inchani exhibits the contrasting sounds as in these words, as heard in recording W012 at 30 seconds and W032 at 21 seconds in the linked corpus. Which of those sounds better? And which of those is verifiable? The second one. We don't do this, but we could. We could do this. So including reference source data in your corpus enriches the reading, allowing the reader to verify, including all source data, or at least all the source data that you can with permission from the users, or from the speakers, gives the reader a chance to, yes, spend 10 years in a village and say, and they can't, no one can test you on that if they don't have access to your data. And so science is about testing and retesting results. Experiment may be reproducible with chemicals found in the laboratory, but minority linguistic experiments cannot be easily repeated without access to the raw data. So this push for publishing both the data analysis is called reproducible research and has been extended to linguistics. This is a really interesting article here, reproducible research in linguistics. So if a linguist makes a claim that a skeptic can only reproduce by spending 3 decades working in the same language community, work conditions. The original claim is really, our view is that it is not healthy for linguistic descriptions to be supported by examples that cannot be reproduced except by doing one's own field work. In research, and it may be important, but unless enough detail of the utterances and context are made available so that it can be subjected to true reproducibility tests by skeptics, it isn't science. So, we're doing on time here. Quite well. Yeah. Yeah.
So Saymore is the tool to do tests for sure. Is it also the tool to do word level collection? Like,
No.
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 Anyway, if you have any comments on the right tool.
Yeah. Word level collection. If your goal is to do dialectal analysis, and if your goal is to say how similar are these, WordServe is one of those tools, and you can pull them, you can create them in other tools and export them out. There's a process for that, but WordServe is specifically intended for that, and you even could do it in Excel or something like that and pull that into a tool like Cog. But don't, yeah. Wherever, if you have the data in another format already, yes, you can get it in a dictionary tool. So you can do that in Flex, you can do that in other tool or in other tools and get that available, and then you can move it. The cool thing about modern data is you can convert it. You can take it from this and you can move it. This is probably your starting point for most situations, but you can use rapid word collection tools. There's the Combine is the new one that's out there that I didn't actually mention, and you could do it in other tools and pull it in later. But yeah, so preferably use a dictionary tool. It's going to help you.
So the way to archive it is to archive your Flex data. Correct,
and a PDF, yeah. Flex data can be archived. It is Unicode XML. The academic community is committed to making Unicode read by computers as long as we have computers. Yeah, that's the goal. And we don't really have a reason to move beyond Unicode. Yeah. Just looking for the names. You got it? Okay. So, Gary Simons, and Brenda Berger, two of my thesis advisors, they have looked at the problem of language documentation, and they have come up with two things that sort of get bundled together with bold. One of those is a recommendation for the minimal contents of a language documentation corpus. If you only have 2 weeks to do a language documentation, what do you want in there? But they also have canonized an oral first workflow of annotation. So the modern language documentation process. First of these, the first step, as those 6 steps we're doing, is recording. You want to get that content. You want to have it. Gather it together. You want a listed list. You want word lists and grammatical paradigms. If you've got a linguist involved or a paralinguist involved in the documentation, you can get those more easily. You don't really necessarily need to be a linguist to get the word list, but to do useful grammatical paradigms, you probably need to have a linguist involved because they know what they're looking for. Events, interactive discourse, narrative, procedural discourse, oratory, description, drama, poetry, songs, formulaic discourse, language play, even unintelligible speak. How do people talk to babies? How does that work in your language? That's something that will be lost if the language community completely stopped using that language. Analytical discussions about any other content. Sometimes this is a discussion of, oh, when do you use your language? Nope. Or, okay, I heard this thing, what's going on here? And the person says, in language or even in French or English, oh, that's what happens when we're in this situation. You can record that content, and that content also is more data. Written works by local authors, if they're available, great. You can get the copy, if you get permission from them to add those in, that's even more data that you have. How is the language currently used? Events, activities, image, locations, maps, and artifacts. This is not just language documentation, this is language and culture documentation. And you need descriptive metadata about all content collected. If you collect something and you don't write down who was there, when you did it, what equipment you used, and get permission, you probably won't. If you don't write it down before you leave, you probably won't. And even if you may think that a year from now you're going to remember, you probably won't.
Even if you try, it will be very, very difficult.
Yes.
Even if you try.
Exactly. So you also need to be careful to make sure that you get a choice of speakers that includes different genders, different ages, maybe even different levels of language. If you've got someone who is, yes, you want your qualified speaker as the main one that you're recording, but it can be interesting linguistically to have someone that is bilingual and do an analysis of that. Oh, look at this. They're making this change in their idiolect because of this context. Be enough to write a paper right there. So you also need people higher level, and somebody at the bottom, the rich and the poor, educational level. The more variety, also, of course, regional varieties. Documenting in this village, but you can spend a day going around the neighboring villages. Really strong towards the west. All that data into Seymour, you can do the gathering, the converting, the organizing, the annotating, check to make sure that you've done everything you intended to do, and get it ready for archiving. So adding value traditionally meant transcription. Traditionally it meant written transcription. So that would be a written transcription in the orthography or in the IPA, and a written translation into a language of wider communication, probably French or English, and maybe interlinearization if you get to it. But our ability to record and archive language materials outstrips our ability to make their content accessible through transcription. We can record in 2 hours more data than we can transcribe in 2 months. Or 2 weeks, 2 months, whatever. It gets exponentially larger. So expect delays. This is where it slows down. We call this the transcription bottleneck. The extreme workload of written transcription, transcription bottleneck, means that large amounts of language documentation content may never be ready for distribution. Because we don't feel like the linguists are going to want it. Any other linguist is going to want it until we transcribe it. So at best, this unfinished content may be hidden in the archive because we didn't describe it well enough. At the worst, the staff or resources can be reassigned and the unfinished content may be lost to history. And this is just the truth. But small language communities are losing their languages faster than linguists using conventional methods can document them. And using written methods creates this bottleneck, so what can we do? A possible solution arose from combining 2 ideas, and that is the bold approach. So a team at SIL developed basic oral language documentation. And let's go with that. So basic oral language documentation is, as I said, it's 2 things. One, it's a list of what is your go bag, if you understand that concept, of things you need to know about the language. What are the things you have to have? And also, how can we get that annotated so that it's useful more efficiently? So you take your original recording, you pull it into a tool. You can do it in Seymour, you can do it in A-Line, you can do it in other tools, and you cut it, and Seymour does automatic breaks. You can have, let's say you're at a funeral. The chief is giving a eulogy, and you are 4 rows back recording on your phone because you can't be in his face with a microphone, and so your recording is awful. It's not the ideal situation, but that is cultural right there. If you can get permission to be able to use it, so you can take that recording. If the recording is good enough that a qualified speaker can understand it, really good at understanding bad audio. The data that came from the moon landing with Neil Armstrong is so badly cut that a machine has no idea what he is saying. But you listen to it and your brain fills in the gaps. A language informant, come to your office, listen to the original recordings in chunks, repeat it in slow and careful speech. You end up with the original recording in fast speech and another copy in slow speech. If the original recording was good enough, you can actually do analysis on both to see how does the language change when we speak slowly. But also, honestly, this person is probably than the village chief. And you can do this careful speech transcription, and then you can move through to do the oral translation. And this doesn't need to be the same person. You can have someone that is, I use the word qualified. It's hard to say, and who are you looking for? But there's not really a better term that I've been able to find. But you can have somebody do this careful speech transcription, and then speaker up by phrase, by clause. You can listen to each chunk and speak that into a translation. It doesn't take much longer to do, let's say, maybe 3 times longer than the original recording to do the careful speech. And then again, to do the oral translation. You can go through this very fast. You're just recording it chunk by chunk. You don't have to remember, oh, what was the first sentence? Oh, you're still on that sentence. If you don't like that recording, you stop it, you record over it. And then all of that gets bundled together. And then you do the same process for the oral, or for the translation. So you end up with the original that still has that original speaker's authority, that chief, that leader, that person. But you also have a careful speech, that's not easy to read, a careful, clear, and slow studio version of the audio that you can use for analysis. Have this oral translation, also clear and slow. Oral are the source for written transcription and documentation. They could be done immediately if you have time, or they can be done at a later point. Even as a different project by different people as the basis of a new descriptive corpus. If this becomes available, it can be used by, that audio annotation can be used by others. List of resources, again, I'm going to share out the presentation. I'm going to send an email to Helene with links to this presentation. We're doing on time, good. Okay, so it is a tool. Originally, when people were doing this, they were doing it with tape recorders that you would play, you would pause and start, pause and start. You can do it with voice recorders out in the village as well, where you can pause and start. But this tool, Seymour, makes it a lot easier. Usually you do your original recording in Gold, and you do your annotation somewhere else later. And usually, hopefully somewhere with electricity and power, which is the same thing. Yeah. So, Seymour. This is how the process, a little bit of how you see the process. It took this and said, oh, there's a pause there. It automatically drew a line there to say, oh, that seems like a reasonable place to stop. This is not chunking it to the word level. It is chunking it to the phrase level. It won't actually let you create a chunk less than a second. If you're trying to chunk to the word level, you need to be in Pratt or in Elan to do that analysis. This is designed for the phrase level, but it's quick, easy, fast. And it automates this process, and it creates this staggered audio that you can see here. Then be careful in the translation. That's an overview of the process. So you may or may not get the written transcription done if you're using the bold methodology for all of it, but you should do it for some of it. You should do some written transcription before you leave the village of a few things at least to have as a reference. This is just a way to get past. So after you have that data, you need to archive it. You got to get it out. You got to get it safe. I've heard of situations where they send 2 separate people different routes, each with a hard drive, to get it out of the village to somewhere they have internet, so that they can archive that data. And Saymore helps you to do that. It connects with REAP so that we can get it archived. It also connects to other archives out there, like there are some other archives out there, and gets them ready. And then mobilization. So how do you mobilization here? But mobilization in language documentation means working with speaker communities to produce products from language documentation that can be used to counter language endangerment. Language documentation stopped at the archive. Once it's an archive, hands off. I'm done. I've done my duty. It's done. But does anyone know what this building is? Yeah?
Is that the seed?
That is the, yes, that is the Svalbard Global Seed Vault. So this is in Norway. It is a marvel of human for world botanists. Seeds and protect the world's plant biodiversity from and access. Got together and said, "Hey, let's freeze a bunch of our seeds over here. We have to start again." And so the samples are cleaned, decontaminated, so that they can. Items are clearly labeled in bags and boxes. Dates, names, species, and added to a central index. The boxes are placed in specific locations so they can be found, and the natural ice there in Norway helps keep the temperatures cool, but the staff are around for other risks. In the same way, linguistic archives are like this seed vault. The content is prepared in the best quality possible. The individual items are clearly labeled in files and folders. The overview metadata is collected on content, language, situation, and date. The materials are submitted to relevant sections of the archive, and an index is maintained. And the archivists actively work to protect this data, the storage, from fire, water, mechanical failure, and corruption. The weird thing about writing is every time we come up with a new way to store writing, it gets less stable. It lasts less time. So clay tablets and stone can last thousands of years. Vellum, papyrus, paper, we're down to digital word processing, which is tens of years, if all goes well. And so when you're talking about, we talked about in the archiving workshop, you have the working for and the archival form. So if you were editing a video, your working form is all of the clips. And for example, the configuration file that you're using as you're editing that video. That's your working form. Your presentation form is the exported video that you've at the end. Your archival form is the highest quality of that presentation form and all of your source clips, all the clips that you used to edit. But when you're talking about text, your archival form is a TIFF file. Audio file, your archival form is WAV or AIFF. Video is AVI, MXF or movie. This is from the U.S. Archival, archives.gov, was the Library of Congress. And for a document, it's Unicode text, and you can use open document text, PDF-A, or rich text format. These are the ones that you want to make sure, the critical ones that you store, because they're the ones most likely to be able to be read in the future. It does, because it is Unicode text. Unicode XML text. Flex database is fine.
But it does not include Word doc.
It does not include dot, it does, okay. So, .doc, you should not be using anymore. Proprietary format that Microsoft owns. People have tried to figure it out, but you should not use it. .x is actually, the new format since 2007, is actually a zip file of XML documents. You can open up a docx file with a zip manager and you can see all the content. If Microsoft disappeared tomorrow, you would be able to pull all of the content out of a Word document and reconstruct it. The formatting, yes, would probably be broken, but you could pull the content out. So it's not ideal. Rich text format is for than a .doc or a publisher document or things like that. Yep.
Is compress with zip future-proof?
Zip itself is supposed to be. Yes. Yeah. 7-zip maybe less so, but 7-zip is also a published standard.
Because they 7-zip is published. It's
Yeah, I'm not sure on that.
issue with the Flex database. The database is XML Unicode,
Zipped.
but it's zipped,
That's
just
right.
like docx.
Yeah.
So
That's true.
assuming you can unzip it, it's clear.
Yeah. I believe, I'll have to look into that, but that's interesting, yeah. So you also have the presentation form. You're not going to be sending someone a TIFF file that is 17 megabytes. They're not going to be using the 4K HD version on their phone. You need compressed versions for sharing, like JPEGs, PNGs, MP3s, MP4s, WebM, which is a new media format. And so ideally you archive all of these, but mainly you want to make sure that you archive these.
What's PDF-A?
PDF-A is basically PDF version 4.0. Long time ago, we are going to support this one as long as we can. So when you are exporting, there is a regular PDF that may include nice features like form filling and video and whatever, but then there's old school archiving PDF-A, PDF archive, which I believe is based on version 4.0, that is a published standard, and that is the best archival format that you can create for a PDF.
When we say that's PDF from Word,
Yeah.
or
It's not.
it's not.
No.
What do we do about that?
Yeah. I don't know yet.
Okay.
It's PDF, and that's already helpful because the PDF is there so you can see how it looked. The PDF is not your working copy. It's best if it can be PDF-A, but
Right now we're considering the PDF as presentation form for
Yeah.
literacy.
yeah, and it often is a presentation form. That's correct.
Right,
So-
but it's not editable, so.
Yeah.
Right. So this is another issue, is that your editable form and your presentation form are both necessary to understand what you're doing.
Yes.
So often I'll look at an old document and I'll have an editable form,
Yeah.
but with old fonts, I have no idea what it was supposed to look like.
Yeah.
So having the PDF and the editable
You need
together
both,
is
yeah.
actually necessary.
Yeah, you need both. And Publisher is the big example of that. Publisher to 10 years ago.
6 months.
Nearly 6 months, yes. That's the worst example there of a non-archival quality document. So we have SIL's digital archive, which is REAP, and there's a little bit of history about that. We don't really need. Putting things in the vault is great. Walmart seed vault. I'm in desperate need of some more seeds to plant this year. Could you please send some seeds to help save my farm? enclose the list of all right. The analogy to the seed vault breaks down here. If someone removes some of the seeds from the seed vault, there are now less seeds in the vault. We have less in the archive. Digital media originals, so why do we have to worry about the data safety? But every time you access a drive that stores data, that drive edges closer to failing. It gets that much closer to dying, and the drives need to be tested every once in a while to make sure they're still okay, which also adds, and every time you access it, increases the risk of corruption, viruses, and hacking. Ideally, the ideal archive is a hard drive sitting in a temperature. So most archives end up having, they have their deep copy that they only pull every once in a while. That is the copy that they might share with people. But if it's sitting in, okay, so discoverability, still good. Hitchhiker, didn't you? Yes, I did. It was on display in the bottom of the locked file category. So when you put things in REAP, they go into the open language. They are available and they are indexed in the Open Language Archive, and they are available on boxes. They're available online, and theoretically, even though this is a really old screenshot of Google, theoretically they are available on Google. So if you're searching for resources, hopefully you will find Language Archive and the language code and make it available. But this is an example I found of a story about a mermaid, and it is probably easier to find the actual documents because they don't tell you who should you contact. It's in the archive. It's there. There is a text file. There is a, and if I can't get access to it, how is somebody in the village going to get access to it? And so some things are hidden in plain sight. So going back to the 5 steps, I love this article. This was documentation in the 21st century by David Nathan. This chapter, or this presentation, assumes that you hope that some of your fieldwork results will one day be applied to the maintenance, strengthening, or revitalization of the visited community's language. That is not an assumption that was made even 10 years ago by most people, by most linguists. So we do need to store the archive quality content. We need to, but those are not the convenient formats that are used in. So we also, while the use of these materials is an exercise for the community, revitalization requires use of those materials in ways familiar to the speakers. Today, that means media, websites, apps, and media. Getting them out there so people can use them today, tomorrow, the next day. So the vaults do serve a purpose, protecting valuables from the elements and even from ourselves for the long term. But what is necessary to turn around the decline of endangered language, and how can these resources be shared now? The best example on the internet of an archive by the people for firstvoices.com by the First Peoples, I believe it's Canada. This is an amazing resource of literacy materials, stories, videos, clips that was developed by the community and put together for many different languages. Some of them, they've chosen not to make them available to the public. This is our cultural heritage. We want it to be available to our people, and they're managing those rights. Anyone to be able to know about. That is part of this grassroots movement. It's not okay. There are examples where something gets archived. Okay, this is actually, let's say this secret want men able to access this content. And some archives, not this one, but some archives have been set up way. So my thesis tool was Prestige, which I took that original audio that you saw. You have the careful speech, in slow and careful speech. And you can play with all those layers. Back, you can slow it down, speed it up. But when I was talking to John Hatton, he said, yeah, the real feature for this may not be the tool itself. It may be making those selections and exporting it out to a video you can put on YouTube. And so I'm working on that right now, getting it to export. My hope is that there eventually will be a language documentation community-oriented process where the speakers share those stories and songs. The performances are recorded in video and audio. They're annotated and translated. The raw data and annotations are archived, so down here. The community organizes and categorizes that content into lessons. Content and tagging can be used in Prestige or in other tools. And that content can be used interactively or at home or in the classroom for heritage and language learning. My hope is that we will at some point have, yes, we want the archives. We don't want to forget that, but to have also resources available to the community. So it's getting to the end here of this presentation. This is really small. Okay. On a language documentation corpus. This is what this. They're interested in who is speaking, what's the significance. Ethno Arts is interested in the oral storying. Survey, let's see here. Yeah, I know. I got to use my mouse to. Yeah. So vernacular education. You want to use that to build educational materials. Create their primers and their easy readers. And their key terms. So this archive audio or archive corpus with conversations, greetings, daily life, a bit of everything can be used for a lot of linguistic purposes. And next slide. What I found that I don't think a lot of people have been talking about is you've got your documentation project. You have your source recordings. You have your metadata. You have your oral translation. And you have a little bit of written annotation. If you don't get, well, okay, let's go to the next slide here. So, okay. If you're doing the documentation project, you are facilitating community login sharing. Sometimes some of the younger people are hearing stories for the first time because that elder is speaking that thing, is telling that story. As soon as you get the source recordings, you have a record of that experience. It is available. This is already valuable to the community. And you just have source recordings. You haven't done any annotation, no linguistics. Once you get to the metadata, you now have a catalog there so people can find that content recorded. Once you have the oral transcription, you now have a fast speech and a slow speech version of the same content. Someone that is diaspora that wants to work on learning their language or getting better at their language, they have a slow version and a fast version that they can listen to get better at speaking. Once you do the oral translation, that opens it up to a wider audience, including even the diaspora that do not speak the language. If there's someone in France and they want to know, oh, what was that story about this elder? They can listen to it in French or English. And they can that in the written transcription. That's the cool part of this, and this is why I created Prestige, because I want to see this stuff made available to the community. But then once you get that written annotation, that opens up literacy resources, natural language process, creating language, or all the cool tech stuff opens up once you get the tech, or once you get it written. So one thing that you can't get into a community. That ever happened in Cameroon? And if we had language documentation corpora for the languages in the Northwest, Southwest, and far North right now, we'd be a lot better off with our work. Because we would have resources ready and available to work with. Yeah. And sometimes you may do one where the community isn't as interested, but the process of doing the language documentation might actually get them interested in their language. And it could open up new things like, or new opportunities. And maybe they'll decide later, oh, we've lost it, we really want it back. Hebrew is like the prime example of, oh, the language was not used and it's back. So, yeah. So that's my new soapbox, talking about language documentation as I'm taking the course. But the original language documentation people may be cringing when I say, oh, how about language documentation as an add-on? But if you can do quality recordings, describe them, archive them, you're doing better linguistics. And the community will be thankful. And the community will be more thankful if it's archived and they get a copy. Yeah.
I was going to be a linguist, go for a workshop, and we hadn't thought about this before today, but we say, I want to do something.
Yeah.
What tools should we do? What's our first step to start this ball rolling?
It depends on what you're collecting. If you're collecting media, if you're collecting audio and video, that makes that process easier. There are other tools you can do that process. You can do it in Elan, and you can
install Seymour and record in Seymour.
No, you do, and then you pull the recordings into Seymour to do the. You can record in Seymour, but you probably are going to get a better recording off of a digital recorder or a proper setup than you're going to get from the You don't use your microphone. Yes.
I think one important issue is think about informed to get informed consent. The American about getting how to get it in our context.
Yes.
We had conversations with people, and we had a form that we laid out where we talked about this, we talked about this, we talked about this. The person gave this, and we signed it.
Yes. Yes.
And informed consent is not retroactive, or excuse me, it will be applied retroactively. You can't grandfather your data.
Right.
And say they were fine with it back then. The university that wants to see your informed consent signed today, when its rules apply to what you did 20 years ago.
And informed consent applies to everyone involved in the process. If you have a speaker and you are the recorder and you have somebody holding the microphone, and that person holding the microphone decides, I don't want this to be published, they have the right to do that. Anyone involved in the process can say no, this cannot be published. So you cross your T's and dot your I's and get that consent from everyone involved. And if you can get it in writing, great. If the best you can get is that person speaking into the microphone saying, hey, I give SIL my permission to use this data for language revitalization and all other purposes, great. Get as much consent as you can, but sometimes there are situations that you can't. The written is not ideal. So,
what if you're national, working with other nationals?
To interact with the international academic community, you need that consent. We could get sued very easily for a lot of things if we use something out of context. For example, Dallas or GIAL, the university before Dallas, as it became Dallas International, they had permission from the people that had done their theses to publish their thesis on their website. But that was permission for GIAL to publish their theses. When they changed their name to Dallas International University, they no longer had the right to publish their students' theses on their website. They had to go out and get permission again because of the copyright of the form that was signed. And so there are a lot of theses that are not available on their website because they haven't gotten people to sign the new form. Yep. A quick presentation to close up here. So I'm really interested in machine learning and artificial intelligence. And so we talked about before, this is additional, the computer's not good at problem solving. It's not good at recognizing patterns. Still the case. This hierarchy. But when it can do a lot of things that you wouldn't expect a computer to do. It doesn't do it the way you expect it, but it can do a lot of things. So when you're talking about artificial intelligence and machine learning, we have one of the earlier technology or earlier things, which is automated parsing, natural searches, statistics, text-to-speech, speech recognition, and machine translation. These are things that if you have a lot of data, you can teach the computer to do. It used to be, you didn't teach, it used to be, for example, text-to-speech. I taught the computer to pronounce Iwando and Fulde using a rule-based technology. When you see this character, say this sound. And that was very meticulous, but if I had a whole bunch of transcribed audio or a whole bunch of audio and I could teach the computer to speak in that person's voice. And there's a guy at Carnegie Mellon who took all of the audio Bibles that were available and generated a text-to-speech voice for each one of those audio Bibles. Now we can't publish them without permission of the person that was speaking, but because it is in that person's voice. But you could use that to speak new content in the language. And he's actually offered to the Bible translation organizations, if you want access to this data that I've created, this model that I've created, I can give it to you because this is your copyrighted material that I'm giving back to you. You can do some really cool things. Don't have that data. So GPT, if you've been on the internet in the last year and a half, ChatGPT, it generates responses necessarily true. The responses almost always sound right. When you start digging into the detail, you realize that it's making some things up. Yes?
This is a hot topic right now with the Australian Broadcasting Corporation.
Yes.
Last week reported a story that the mayor of a city in Australia is suing, I don't know.
Yeah.
So he's suing them. Right. Basically, there was a scandal back in the 2000s where the Australian Note Printing Works developed technology for plastic banknotes, and they were found to have executives were found to have paid bribes to some countries to take on the technology. And ChatGPT was asked by someone
about that scandal.
About that, and it generated a document summarising what happened and listing names of people who were found to have paid bribes, etc.
Yep.
This man who was suing them. He asked for the content to be removed because it was false, because it listed his name as one of those who paid bribes. He was in fact the whistleblower.
Yes. So, So it is plausible responses that are not necessarily true, and it is scary for academic research. I asked Chetty, who is Brenda Berger? And Brenda Berger was one of my thesis advisors, and it said, oh, she works with SIL, and she has done a lot of work in North American languages. And I'm like, oh, really? Can you give me some? Because I know she worked in the Solomon Islands. Can you give me some references for that? to prove that she had said that. It made them up. They don't exist. Yeah. Yes. I asked it, how will AI impact minority linguistics in the next 10 years? It will probably help with preserving endangered languages, increased access to minority languages, for example, chatbots and learning apps, recognition of dialect. Sorry, that's unlegible. It's small. Recognition of dialects and regional variants. Yes, it's already doing that. COG is doing that. It says, oh, this one's similar. It's really good at that. And challenges related to data in minority languages can be a significant challenge to the development of AI systems for these languages. It's crucial to collect and curate in minority languages to train AI models effectively. Efforts to collect and preserve data must be encouraged and supported. So this is asking ChatGPT how AI is going to affect. So when you're working with minority languages, you have to work smarter. And it's called outsource. I went to a workshop at Carnegie Mellon. This guy that had worked at Microsoft had created this really cool machine learning tool, and he had no idea how it worked. Because what he said, what he did was he took audio data, thousands upon thousands of hours of audio data from 10 of the world's most resourced languages: Arabic, French, Spanish, Portuguese, Chinese, English. Well, we've got all these languages that have, and we have a lot of transcribed IPA transcriptions of that content, or we can at least generate something close. And so he trained the system to recognize sounds and output a sound in one language and a sound in another language. It's still a sound. And so his tool, it takes all the term phones, because it's not really specific whether it's phonemes or what, yeah. So sounds in the training set. And so if you have a language in the training set, it's going to do a good job. It's going to recognize most of the sounds and output something that sounds, or that's. But if you have some sound, any idea? So he took that data from languages that did exist. Okay, let me pull over to the side here. There. Okay. So this was my phonetic transcription of the recording, and this is what Alisor. Okay, first of all, the first draft of this, when I met this guy, it was outputting a lot of really gibberish IPA characters. One of the most common things coming up was a voiceless B. What is a voiceless B? It's a P. Apparently, Japanese makes distinctions between voice Bs and voiceless Bs. And so there were a lot of those in the context. And so I sat down over an evening, and I looked around, and there's an archive called Foible that allowed us to use the content. And so I scraped phonetic stories from 3,000 of the world's languages, phonetic and phonemic inventories from that site, and we created presets for his tool. So, okay, you are not allowed to put out voiceless B because this doesn't exist in the language. So you tell it what you think is in the language, it generates a transcription. If it doesn't seem right, you change the inventory and try again until you get closer to what you're expecting. And so yes, it is not going to distinguish. But the idea is to get something that is close and is easier to edit than it is to transcribe. That would be the holy grail of this process: is if you get something out that is easier to fix than it is to do it or to do. So we have here Amozuwawu. It came out with Amozuwawu. So I mean, it's close, and you could fix it. But I gave it another one, and I gave it another index. And so this is an example, but by tweaking the possible outputs, I got it percent accurate on the text that it was using, on the text that it was trying to generate, which 50% is amazing in this world of a language where it's called, or in a language where the technology doesn't know the language.
Doing the group in blue.
So what it is the training set is already compiled. He did that all in the laboratory. That's done. Here are the sounds that I think are in this language, and it tries to generate the IPA. It's still not perfect, and there's a lot of reasons why. Work well for consonants is that it's that the data that it has doesn't have the high frequency data that's necessary to recognize consonants, because a lot of it was telephone data. He didn't even know that was an issue. But one of the funny things is I removed 11 nonsense or 5 nonsense IPA characters from his training or from his outputs, and I improved the quality by 11%. So this is a way that you can use majority languages to do something interesting in minority languages. There are tools out there. Next, there we go, for either generating images or modifying images. DALL-E, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion, Night Cafe uses all of those. And so, yeah, you can use it for fun and just have it generate some things. These are some things I've asked it to generate. Image. So, yeah, that's cool. And if you were illustrating a book, yeah, you could probably generate some images to go along with your book that might be relevant. But this is something to work. They took some of the art of reading images, type images that were line art. All right, give me this as a dog with a pink background. It generated this from that. Okay? Next page. They said, okay, no, I want it line art. I want a line art drawing, a simple line art drawing of a dog. It generated that. Said, okay, I want a dog drawn in a Sharpie with a flat pink background, and it generated that. So there is a possibility of taking all of our line art stuff and making photorealistic images out of AI. This was replicate.com Scribble. So this is the tool they were using. Again, I'm going to share the link with the content of the presentation with everyone. Yeah.
What's the copyright intellectual properties issue of that?
Right there. It is, you can use the content. It is hard, especially in US law, to copyright that. This was a comic book, Zarya of the Dawn, that was published. They got copyright, and then they later said, no, you really can't have copyright. You just gave it text, the tool gave you the stuff. We're not really sure who owns the copyright. Yeah, it's still in discussion. You can use the content, but can you say it's your content? There's still a lot of discussion, and this is out there. So there's still a lot of fuzziness around it. But yeah, I mean, I love this idea of just taking all those line art drawings and just say, if we have the right to that drawing, now we have this. And it knows, because it's looked at dogs before, what a dog looks like, and it can generate it. Yes.
So at the very beginning, things that computers can do well, and things that people can do well.
Yep.
And I think what we're looking at here, what you're saying is, the lines are fuzzying about the things that computers can do well.
Yep.
But I think the question you brought up about ChatGPT and its correctness is there are still some things that people are required to do.
That's right.
Make judgments, make analysis, make truth statements which are actually true.
Yes.
Right?
That's true.
What's interesting is that it can draw an awesome dog.
Yep.
It can't tell you if it's a dog or not, right? And so we're seeing some changes in what computers can do, but I think we still need to be using our judgment about what to do with those things.
In many cases, the person here is the moderator. They ask for something, it gives you a whole bunch of things, and most of them are wrong, but one of them is close enough. And you say, okay, I want that one. You ask it something, or you tweak it a little further, tweak your, it's moderation, it's moderating. And so the big deal is, if you ask ChatGPT, right now to use ChatGPT, you have to have Cameroon. So, or you can use it through Bing in a limited capacity. But I asked it about languages in Cameroon, and it knows almost nothing about. It knows the names of the languages. It knows very little else. I suspect that is because if the etymologue had been open access as it used to be, I suspect that ChatGPT would know a lot more correct information about minority languages that it doesn't. But we are a long way from Google Translate doing the languages of Cameroon, because that data just doesn't exist. And if it does exist, it's not available because it is in a printed copy sitting in a dusty library somewhere, and nobody ever scanned it or cleaned it up, or nobody ever got permission to be able to post that somewhere that it would be available. Yes.
My son looked up Ngomba Ireland on these AI things.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. It couldn't distinguish between Ngomba and Ngomba by Creedy.
Correct.
And it also put Ngomba being spoken in another part of the West than where it's spoken.
That's right. It is making inferences based on statistics, and if there are two things with a similar name, especially if one place they've used the same name, it might actually merge those together into one concept. And the thing is, you can't ask that information because it's just numbers.
I think the other thing, if you're using statistics,
Yeah.
if you've got a huge amount of data for this, little bits of variation aren't going to cause much problem.
Yep.
But if you only have 2 citations,
That's right.
you're getting into the area where noise affects it.
Okay, so that was what I had. I think there's a lot. I think there are some very specific places where, very specific places and tasks where we could be using AI to do non-linguistic things that will help our linguistics, like images or data management. ChatGPT is amazing for programming. I was trying to figure out how to do this video export, and I said, okay, ChatGPT, how do you, using this technology, export a video clip using this technology? And it said, oh, here, this is how you do it. Okay, how do you export 2 video clips back to back? And it said, oh, okay, so it modified the text. So, okay, now, I have some alternate audio for those. Can you give me, how do I export out both of those clips with this modified audio? And it said, oh, it's this. And then and it just kept going through, and then it generated code to copy and paste into an editor and use. And then I said, okay, so you now have given me the process to generate this. Now write me a function that will take a list of data and generate that string. And so it generates the code that I need to run to make it work. And then I said, okay, now give me example data that I can put into your function that will generate the code that will generate the different transformations, one on top of another. Eventually it gets lost, but, and oh, the other thing was, oh, I only need small clips of it. And so this technology, it's called FFmpeg, uses these long strings to generate, and I just couldn't wrap my head around the complexity of it. But I was able to get one working copy of 2 clips side by side, and then I could take that and extrapolate it out to 100 clips. So it's great for programming, except for the fact that that version I was using got cut off in 2021. So there was some new technology that they didn't know about, and new updates that they didn't know about. But yeah, it's amazing and it's scary. Useful and it's scary, and it's just, yeah. Thank you, everyone. Need to get to the, I plan on going to the aviation thing. I really somewhere today, so he couldn't be here, but